Fight with Bruce Lee. And I'm gonna tell you, my opinion, Bruce Lee was the greatest martial artist that ever lived.
Millions of people have argued for decades about Bruce Lee. Some say his power was clever camera angles, and that there is no real proof he could fight outside a film set.
When you do punch, now I'm leaning forward a little bit, hoping not to hurt any camera angle. I mean, you gotta put the whole hip into it and snap it.
But before his death, one man shut that argument down completely. It was Jim Kelly. He was a national karate champion who fought real men under real pressure. And when Jim Kelly finally spoke, he offered proof so shocking that Bruce Lee critics are going to have to shut up for life. Jim Kelly goes on record. A champion stakes his reputation. Jim Kelly had been tested in ways cameras never capture. He had been hit hard, knocked down, and forced to fight through fatigue and fear. He understood what separated real competence from performance. That's exactly why his assessment of Bruce Lee came from professional experience, not hero worship. Jim Kelly did not wait until the end of his life to be careful with his words. Before cancer took him in 2013, he went on record knowing exactly what it would mean to attach his name to Bruce Lee's reputation. He made it clear that he was not offering admiration, nostalgia, or movie mythology. Instead, he was stating plainly that what he witnessed from Bruce Lee exceeded anything he had seen in sanctioned competition, full-contact karate matches, or hard gym sparring with elite fighters. And Kelly understood how risky that statement was, because once you say something like that, other fighters start measuring your credibility instead of your memories. And Jim Kelly had too much on the line to exaggerate. Kelly was not a commentator or a Hollywood tough guy pretending to be legitimate. He was a national karate champion who fought during an era when contact was real, rules were loose, and mistakes ended matches fast. He had trained in Shorin Ryu and other traditional systems, competed against ranked opponents, and won under pressure when conditioning, fear, and fatigue stripped fighters down to instinct. Kelly began by explaining that Bruce Lee revealed himself before throwing a single strike. He noticed it in Lee's stance and balance, in how his weight sat ready to move without shifting, and in the way distance was managed with almost no wasted motion. Lee did not crowd space or retreat unnecessarily. He stayed just outside range, forcing the other person to reach while remaining able to enter instantly. To Kelly, this was already a warning sign. Fighters who understand distance at that level are not guessing but calculating. When they began training together, Kelly realized something else about Bruce Lee that unsettled him. Bruce Lee did not react to visible movement but reacted to intention. Kelly described moments where he felt his own attack forming in his mind, only to have Lee already stepping offline, cutting the angle, or intercepting before the motion was complete. This was not speed for the sake of flash. It was anticipation built from reading posture, breath, and commitment. Kelly had faced fast fighters before, yet he had not faced someone who seemed to arrive at the answer before the question was fully asked. Kelly also pointed out something skeptics rarely consider. Bruce Lee did not need warm-up rounds to find rhythm. There was no feeling-out process, no gradual increase in intensity, and no testing exchanges. His timing was already set. From the first exchange, Lee was moving at operational speed, with balance intact and breathing controlled. Kelly said this was something he had only seen in fighters who had gone beyond competition habits and into constant readiness. It meant Lee did not rely on adrenaline spikes or momentum. Instead, he relied on preparation. What disturbed Kelly most was how calm Lee remained while doing all of this. There was no tension in his shoulders, no wasted tightening, and no signs of overcommitment. His movements were short, direct, and immediately recoverable. If a strike missed, he was already safe. If an opening appeared, he was already there. To Kelly, this was proof of a fighter who was not performing, but operating. That was the moment Jim Kelly stopped watching Bruce Lee as a co-star and started studying him like a subject worth serious attention. And the deeper he looked, the harder it became to deny what he was seeing. The technical proof, timing, structure, and predictive control. Jim Kelly said the easiest way to expose a fake fighter is to watch what happens just before contact, because that is where rehearsed movement breaks down and real mechanics take over. When Kelly studied Bruce Lee, he noticed that Lee was not waiting for strikes to come toward him. He was intercepting them during the weight transfer that happens a fraction of a second before a punch or kick launches. Kelly knew that every strike begins with a commitment of mass, usually a shift through the hips or a subtle drop in the stance, and Lee attacked at that exact moment. This meant opponents were being hit while they were still loading power, when balance was weakest and defense was not yet in place. Another key proof was Lee's footwork. It was shockingly small and efficient, especially compared to the wide, bouncing movement common in karate and kickboxing gyms at the time. Lee did not hop or reset after every exchange. He used short slides, pivots, and half steps that kept his feet under his hips. This allowed him to explode forward without sacrificing stability. Kelly emphasized that this was not a flashy movement meant for cameras. It was a movement designed to maintain structure while closing distance fast enough to interrupt an attack before it fully developed. One of the things that stood out most to Kelly was how stable Lee's center of gravity remained even at full speed. When many fighters punch or kick hard, their weight spills forward or rises upward, forcing a recovery step that creates vulnerability. But Lee did the opposite. His weight stayed low and centered, which allowed him to strike and immediately return to a guarded position without delay. This meant Lee could throw combinations without becoming exposed, because every strike ended in balance rather than extension. Kelly also addressed the claim that Lee's power was exaggerated because of camera angles and sound effects. He explained that Lee's punches did not feel fast because of arm speed alone. They felt heavy because they were driven by coordinated body mass. Lee connected his hands to his hips and legs so that force traveled through the entire frame, not just the shoulder and elbow. This is why Lee could hit lighter fighters and still move them, and why even controlled contact felt dense and unpleasant. It was not a slap force, but a transfer of weight. Another detail Kelly found impossible to ignore was Lee's constant angle adjustment during exchanges. Instead of standing in front of an opponent and trading strikes, Lee stepped just off the center line while attacking. Kelly described moments where Lee would enter at a slight diagonal, strike, and already be positioned outside the return line before a counter could fire. This created the illusion that Lee was always ahead, when in reality he was simply refusing to stand where danger existed. To Kelly, this showed a level of spatial awareness that most fighters only develop after years of being hit, and none of this required Lee to overpower opponents or overwhelm them with aggression. He controlled pace through positioning and timing, forcing others to chase him into bad decisions. Fighters who tried to rush him found themselves intercepted. Fighters who hesitated found Lee already inside their space. This kind of control was rare because it demands discipline, patience, and constant adjustment rather than raw athleticism. What convinced Kelly beyond doubt was consistency. These qualities did not appear occasionally or only when Lee was fresh. They were present every session, every exchange, regardless of speed or intensity. There were no lucky moments or highlight tricks. Lee operated the same way each time, which told Kelly he was watching a system, not improvisation. Those technical realities became impossible to dismiss once Kelly saw how Bruce Lee trained when no cameras were present and no performance was required. The training laboratory. What happened after the set went quiet. Jim Kelly and Bruce Lee starred together in the 1973 hit martial arts movie Enter the Dragon. Released after Bruce Lee's unexpected death, it is still considered the greatest martial art movies of all time. It was on the movie set that Kelly saw the real proof of Bruce Lee's fighting skills. It did not happen when cameras were rolling or when choreographers were watching. It happened after the set of Enter the Dragon emptied out, when the lights went quiet and the workday officially ended. But Bruce Lee stayed behind to train. Kelly explained that Lee treated those sessions like controlled experiments rather than workouts. Each round had a purpose, and nothing was done casually or for conditioning alone. Lee wanted answers, not sweat. Bruce Lee would decide on a single problem before sparring even began. One day it might be closing distance against a taller opponent. Another day it might be intercepting a lead hand without retreating. Lee would explain the objective, start the round, and then repeat the same situation over and over until the outcome stopped changing. Kelly said this was testing, adjustment, and retesting under real speed. When something did not work cleanly, Lee stopped immediately. Kelly recalled Lee freezing the session mid-exchange, stepping back, and making tiny adjustments to stance width or foot angle. Sometimes the change was no more than a few inches. Other times it was a slight shoulder rotation or a different hand position on guard. Lee would then restart the exchange at full pace to see if the change solved the problem. If it did not, he adjusted again. This cycle continued until the movement held up under pressure. Kelly emphasized that these were not light drills where partners cooperated. Speed and intent were real, and reactions were honest. The difference was that Lee pulled strikes at the last moment, stopping them just short of impact. The purpose of sparring was not to hurt anyone, but to prove that the opening existed and could be reached consistently. One of the things that unsettled Kelly was how Lee corrected mistakes without raising his voice or stopping momentum. If Kelly made a technical error, Lee did not scold or lecture. He simply stepped into the opening and took the space away. Suddenly, Kelly would be crowded, off balance, or cut off from retreat. The lesson was immediate and physical, and Kelly said this taught him more in seconds than verbal instruction ever could. Lee also tracked patterns. Kelly recalled Lee pointing out tendencies after rounds ended, explaining how certain reactions repeated under pressure. Lee treated these habits as data. He then adjusted his own positioning to exploit them on the next round, often predicting the response before it happened. Kelly said this showed Lee was not just fast or skilled. He was actively reading behavior and planning 2 steps ahead. Kelly said Lee approached training like an engineer refining a machine. Every detail mattered because real fighting did not allow for guesswork. What made this impossible to dismiss was that Lee did not limit these tests to friendly co-stars. He actively sought out other elite fighters to pressure test his methods, and that was where the evidence became undeniable. No footage, no myths. Why private sparring stayed private. Kelly was blunt about one uncomfortable truth most critics avoid. Bruce Lee sparred constantly, but almost never in public and never for show. These were not sessions with students from the Jun Fan Gung Fu Institute, not rehearsed exchanges with actors, and not friendly drills meant to build confidence. According to Kelly, Lee's regular sparring partners included professional fighters, accomplished martial artists, and competitive boxers. This included men like Dan Inosanto, James Coburn, Chuck Norris, Joe Louis, and visiting fighters from karate, taekwondo, and boxing backgrounds. These were men who could hit hard, move fast, and capitalize on mistakes immediately. Kelly emphasized that these sessions stayed off camera by mutual agreement. Filming changed behavior because once a camera appeared, fighters tightened up and either performed techniques they wanted remembered or subconsciously avoided risks. Bruce Lee rejected that environment completely. Recording these moments would have turned real experimentation into theater, and Lee refused to allow that distortion. The exchanges themselves were controlled but intense. Speed was real, so was timing, and pressure was real. What was restrained was follow-through, not intent. Kelly described situations where a missed parry or late-angle step was immediately punished, not with full-force strikes, but with positional dominance that made the mistake undeniable. Lee would intercept entries with his lead hand, crash distance with short footwork, then freeze the exchange just long enough to show exactly where the opening had occurred. There was no arguing with it, and evidence was structural, not anecdotal. Kelly also pointed out that Bruce Lee did not chase public validation because the fighters who mattered already knew. Joe Louis, a heavyweight karate champion, openly credited Lee for changing how he understood speed and interception. Chuck Norris, long before the mythology hardened, acknowledged that Lee's timing and precision were unlike anything he had faced. Dan Inosanto consistently described Lee's sparring as transformative, not because of power, but because of efficiency and control under pressure. These were not casual admirers, but elite practitioners staking their reputations on their assessments. What made the lack of footage frustrating for outsiders was precisely what made it valuable to insiders. There were no rehearsed highlight moments, no slowed-down demonstrations, and no selective edits. There were only first-hand experiences repeated across disciplines, cultures, and competitive backgrounds. Kelly stressed that every serious fighter who trained with Lee walked away altered in how they understood combat distance and initiative because what Lee demonstrated could be felt but not easily copied. That absence of footage became the foundation for doubt, but Kelly reframed it as evidence of intent. Bruce Lee was not building a brand through sparring clips. He was refining a system under real conditions with real consequences for mistakes. And that, Kelly argued, is exactly why the people who trained with him never questioned whether it worked. Still, one criticism refuses to die, and Kelly addressed it directly next: why Bruce Lee avoided tournaments, and why it proves nothing. Kelly treated the tournament question as a misunderstanding so basic it distorted everything that followed. Competitive fighting, he explained, is built around rules, time limits, weight classes, and scoring systems designed to keep fighters safe and outcomes measurable. Jeet Kune Do was built for none of that. It was designed around interception, disruption, and ending an encounter before it could unfold. The system assumed no referee, no rounds, and no second chances. Once that context is understood, the absence of trophies stops being suspicious and starts being logical. Kelly broke it down technically. Core elements of Lee's approach were illegal in every major competition of the era and remain illegal today. Eye attacks, throat strikes, finger jabs to the face, joint destructions against the knee and elbow, groin strikes, and low oblique kicks targeting the opponent's base were not optional tools but central pillars. Lee's interception strategy depended on striking during initiation, not exchanging combinations after contact was established. In a tournament, the very act of stopping an opponent before their technique developed would be penalized as stalling, fouling, or unsportsmanlike conduct. Kelly gave a concrete scenario to make the point unavoidable. In point karate, a clean touch scores and the action stops. In boxing, continuous exchanges are rewarded. In Lee's framework, the moment an opponent shifts weight to initiate an attack, they are already late. The intercepting strike lands before the technique is visible to a judge. The fight is effectively over before it begins. Under competition rules, that moment either goes unseen or is disallowed entirely. Adapting Jeet Kune Do to a tournament environment would require removing its most decisive elements, turning a system designed for asymmetry into one optimized for fairness. Kelly then pointed to real-world proof that critics often overlook. Chuck Norris and Joe Louis did compete, and they dominated. Both men openly credited Bruce Lee for reshaping how they approach timing, distance, and interception. Norris incorporated Lee's principles into his karate foundation and went on to win multiple world titles. Joe Louis, a heavyweight champion, adopted Lee's emphasis on lead hand control, explosive entry, and angle creation, becoming one of the most feared competitors of his generation. They did not use Jeet Kune Do in its complete form because they couldn't, but even a constrained version of its principles proved decisive at the highest levels. Kelly stressed that this mattered more than hypothetical matchups. Lee's system was not designed to produce champions within a sport. It was designed to survive unpredictable violence. The fact that fragments of it could still dominate elite competition only strengthened the argument. If a stripped-down, rule-compliant adaptation could overwhelm world-class fighters, what did that say about the unreduced system? He also addressed the emotional subtext behind the criticism. People wanted public proof because public proof is easy to consume. Tournaments provide rankings, brackets, and highlights. But Kelly argued that Lee deliberately chose a harder path, validation through function, not applause. The men who trained with him did not need scorecards to understand what worked. They felt it in broken rhythm, collapsed structure, and openings that appeared before conscious thought could react. For Kelly, the absence of medals was irrelevant. What mattered was intent, design, and outcome. Jeet Kune Do was never meant to win trophies. It was meant to end fights efficiently, decisively, and with minimal exposure. And that clarity of purpose, Kelly said, was not a weakness. What impressed him most, however, was not how dangerous Bruce Lee could be, but how deliberately he chose not to be. Controlled violence. The final proof Kelly never forgot. Kelly said the moment that stayed with him did not look dramatic from the outside. There were no crowds, no cameras, no raised voices. It was a closed room, a clear floor, and two experienced fighters who understood what real speed meant. Bruce Lee asked for a controlled exchange, then attacked without warning. Kelly felt the pressure instantly, the kind that collapses reaction time. The strikes stopped a fraction of an inch from his face and ribs, close enough that the air displacement was unmistakable. There was no doubt they would have landed. Kelly emphasized that this was not showmanship. Stopping a punch at that distance, at that speed, requires absolute command of range and timing. Most fighters rely on impact to end an exchange. Lee relied on precision. His attacks arrived with full intent, full structure, and full acceleration, then shut down at the last possible moment without wobble or overextension. Kelly explained that this level of control is harder than hitting a target because it demands constant micro-adjustments while the body is already committed to motion. What made it more unsettling was Lee's ability to modulate intensity instantly. In one exchange, Lee pressed aggressively, forcing Kelly to retreat and reset his base. In the next, he eased the pressure, changed angles, and allowed space to breathe, all without breaking posture or balance. Kelly noted that most fighters have a single gear once engagement begins. Lee had many, and he could shift between them mid-exchange without telegraphing the change. That adaptability told Kelly he was dealing with someone operating from understanding rather than habit. Kelly broke down the mechanics to remove any sense of mysticism. Lee's center of gravity stayed low and aligned, allowing explosive acceleration without sacrificing recovery. His strikes were driven by coordinated body mass, not arm speed alone. His eyes stayed locked not on limbs, but on intent, reading subtle cues in shoulder tension, weight transfer, and breath. Kelly said Lee was processing information faster than conscious reaction allowed, intercepting decisions before they fully manifested as movement. But the most convincing element, Kelly admitted, was psychological. Lee never chased dominance emotionally. There was no ego flare or need to overwhelm for the sake of control. He applied pressure when it served a purpose and removed it when the lesson was delivered. That restraint told Kelly that Lee was always aware of the damage he could cause. Controlled violence, Kelly called it. The ability to bring real danger into a space and keep it leashed. In Kelly's final years, he spoke about Bruce Lee with a clarity that surprised even his closest friends. After facing champions across styles, absorbing real punishment, and surviving exchanges where mistakes carried consequences, Kelly felt obligated to be precise. Bruce Lee's reputation was not built on myth, film editing, or cultural nostalgia. It was built on direct demonstration, repeated in private, under conditions where excuses did not survive contact. Kelly stated plainly that Bruce Lee operated one level above everyone he had encountered. Not faster in isolation, not stronger on paper, but more complete. Technique, timing, psychology, and discipline fused into a single operating system. That was the final proof Kelly never forgot. What makes this testimony even heavier is that many fighters who witnessed the same truth chose silence, carrying what they saw to the grave. The silence that speaks, why others never argued back. Jim Kelly said the criticism surrounding Bruce Lee did not come from fighters who had actually stood in front of him. It came from the outside, from people who measured skill by trophies, rule sets, and grainy film clips, not by what happens when two trained men share the same space and mistakes carry consequences. Inside serious martial arts circles, Kelly explained, the debate never really existed. That absence of argument was the real clue. Kelly revealed that several world-class fighters sparred privately with Bruce Lee and made a conscious decision never to talk about it. Not because they were intimidated, embarrassed, or sworn to secrecy, but because there was nothing to gain from explaining something that could not be replicated in words. Among professionals, there is an understanding that certain experiences speak for themselves. If you were there, you knew. If you were not, no explanation would satisfy you. Thus, describing Bruce Lee's skill publicly would have turned a technical reality into a spectacle. Fighters understood that once something is filtered through interviews and headlines, it gets reduced to claims and counterclaims. That process cheapens real encounters. These men had trained long enough to know when silence carries more weight than argument. Their restraint was not avoidance, but acknowledgement. This silence also created a vacuum, and that vacuum invited doubt. Without public sparring footage or tournament records, critics filled the gap with assumptions. They labeled Lee a performer and a choreographer protected by editing, camera angles, and fame. Kelly said those accusations were possible only because the people who knew the truth had no incentive to defend it. Their careers, reputations, and self-worth did not depend on public validation. Bruce Lee's name did not need defending in rooms where ability was understood instinctively. In his final years, Kelly felt the silence had gone on long enough. Not because Bruce Lee needed saving, but because history had begun confusing absence of noise with absence of proof. Kelly knew his own credibility gave him a responsibility others did not feel. He had fought champions, absorbed real damage, and had nothing to gain by exaggeration. When he spoke, it was to place a marker in the record, not to win an argument. The final truth from Jim Kelly was that Bruce Lee did not need film edits or mythology. His proof lived in the people who stood across from him, felt the pressure, and walked away without the urge to challenge the narrative. The criticism existed only because the strongest witnesses chose the dignity of silence over the noise of debate. Make sure to click the cards on the screen now for more interesting videos.